A rock from outer space crashed through a woman's ceiling in Houston while she was sleeping. Let that settle for a second. Not a movie, not a drill, a rock from space through her roof. Now here's where it gets interesting. That wasn't even the biggest story of the week. Because while that was happening, 6 other fireballs were lighting up American skies. A 7-ton asteroid was shaking buildings across 4 states. 2 separate meteors appeared over Michigan on the same night. And a green fireball stretched from Portland to Seattle just yesterday morning. NASA says none of it is connected. Maybe they're right. If you're new here, welcome, go ahead and subscribe, get comfortable. Because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why that word maybe matters so much. Let's begin, not with theory, not with speculation, but with the raw, unadorned record of events. Because before we can discuss what any of this means, before we can weigh the official explanations against what our eyes and ears and instruments have been telling us, we need to sit with what has actually happened. March 4th. A brilliant fireball tears across the sky over the central United States. It lasts long enough that people run outside. Long enough that people pull out their phones. It fragments. It leaves a glowing trail that takes nearly a minute to dissolve. The American Meteor Society receives hundreds of reports from 6 states. March 5th. 2 separate meteors appear over Michigan on the same night. Not the same object. 2 distinct events separated by hours, cutting across the same state sky. One of them produces a sonic boom registered on local seismographs at 2.1 magnitude. Windows rattle in Ann Arbor. March 6th. This one is different. This one shakes buildings. A near-Earth asteroid, 2026 EA1, roughly 7 tons, the size of a small delivery truck, makes a grazing atmospheric entry over the southern United States. It does not fully impact, but it skims deep enough into the atmosphere that the pressure wave it generates rolls across Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. Alarms trigger, car sensors activate. People in Nashville report feeling their floors vibrate. Multiple 911 calls are placed by people who think there has been an explosion. There has not been an explosion. There has been a 7-ton rock from space passing so close to the surface of the Earth that the air itself recoiled. March 8th. Katy, Texas, suburban Houston. A woman hears what she describes as a cannon going off inside her home. She investigates. There is a hole in her roof. There is a hole in her ceiling. There is, on the floor of her spare bedroom, a dense, dark rock, still warm, roughly the size of a large orange, smelling of sulfur and scorched iron. Scientists later confirm it is a chondrite meteorite, ancient, primitive stone metal material from the earliest days of the solar system. It fell from space. It fell through her roof. She was not home at the time. The fireball that preceded it was visible across 3 counties. March 10th. A daytime fireball over the American Southwest. Dashcam footage from Nevada, Utah, and Colorado captures it mid-afternoon. A phenomenon rare enough that most people have never seen one. The AMS receives over 800 reports within 6 hours. March 11th. Michigan again. 2 more meteors. Different night, same state. The same astronomers who noted the improbability 6 days earlier note it again. More loudly this time. March 25th, yesterday morning. Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. A vivid green fireball traces a long, slow arc across the Pacific Northwest sky. Green, which indicates the combustion of magnesium in the incoming rock. It lasts 6 seconds, an eternity for a fireball. Traffic cameras catch it. Pilots report it. The Pacific Northwest Seismic Network picks up a distant low-frequency signal consistent with atmospheric entry. 7 fireballs, 8 days, 1 meteorite through a roof. 1 building shaking near miss that registered on seismographs across 4 states. 2 separate nights of double meteor events over the same state. And then, after a 2-week pause, another one, green, slow, spectacular, over the Pacific Northwest just hours before you are reading or hearing these words. NASA's official statement is brief and consistent. These events are not connected. That statement is probably true in the way that it is meant. And yet it explains almost nothing about what is actually happening. Part 2. What NASA means and what it doesn't. To understand why not connected is an insufficient answer, you need to understand what it is answering. When planetary scientists say 2 fireball events are not connected, They mean they do not share a common parent body. They did not arrive on the same orbital trajectory. They are not fragments of the same disintegrated object. The Houston meteorite and the Portland fireball were not once the same rock, confirmed, agreed. But not connected says nothing about frequency. It says nothing about clustering. It does not address the underlying question that any rational observer would ask. Why, in this specific 25-day window, is Earth encountering so much incoming material? The planet intercepts approximately 100 tons of extraterrestrial material every single day, most of it microscopic dust, the occasional fleck becoming a faint streak, and rarely something large enough to produce the kind of fireball that wakes people. The American Meteor Society logs somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 notable fireball reports in an average year across the entire United States, roughly 11 to 16 per day, though the vast majority of those are faint events reported by one or two observers. Events of the magnitude we are discussing, fireballs dramatic enough to generate hundreds of independent reports, produce sonic booms, rattle buildings, or deposit meteorites, are different. These are measured in single digits per year for any given country. For the continental United States to experience 7 such events in 8 days, one of which involved a confirmed meteorite fall, one of which produced building-level shaking across 4 states, sits at the outer edge of what probabilistic models predict for any calendar month. This does not mean it is impossible. It means it is unusual, and the gap between not impossible and perfectly normal is where all the interesting questions live. Part 3. The context. Nobody is talking about here is where the story becomes genuinely strange. Because the fireballs are not happening in isolation. They are happening against a backdrop of other events, geophysical, solar, astronomical, that taken together paint a picture of a solar system in a temporarily elevated state of activity. The Tonga earthquake. 3 days ago, the strongest earthquake of 2026 struck in the Tonga region of the Pacific Ocean. The magnitude 7.8 event, deep offshore, producing no devastating tsunami but registered on seismographs worldwide, is notable not primarily because of its scale, but because of its timing. The South Pacific has been seismically restless throughout March. The Pacific Ring of Fire, which accounts for roughly 90% of the world's earthquakes, has been producing elevated activity across multiple nodes simultaneously. The Philippines, northern Japan, the Aleutian Islands, and now Tonga. Whether any of this connects to anything beyond normal tectonic behaviour is unproven, but the timing invites questions. The coronal mass ejection, as of this week, a significant CME, a coronal mass ejection, is travelling toward Earth. The Sun, currently near the peak of solar cycle 25, ejected a substantial plasma cloud from its surface following a series of X-class solar flares. The CME is expected to interact with Earth's magnetosphere within the next 24 to 48 hours, potentially producing geomagnetic storm conditions rated G2 or G3 on the NOAA scale. At those levels, aurora can be seen as far south as the central United States. More significantly, strong geomagnetic activity can affect satellite operations, power grid stability at high latitudes, and radio communications. NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center has issued a watch. This is not unusual for a solar maximum period, but it is happening right now, layered on top of everything else. The asteroid that passed closer than the Moon, today. Not hypothetically, not in a forecast. Today, an asteroid designated 2026 FG2 passed between Earth and the Moon, well within the lunar distance, classified as a close approach, even by the generous standards of NASA's planetary defense catalogues. It posed no impact risk. It was small enough that even an atmospheric entry would have produced only a regional event. But closer than the Moon is not a phrase that loses its vertigo with repetition. The Moon is 384,000 kilometers away. A rock from interplanetary space crossed inside that threshold, today. This too is not connected to the fireballs. Orbital mechanics are different for every object, and yet you have a fireball swarm, a 7-ton near miss, a roof-penetrating meteorite, a building-shaking pressure wave, an asteroid that passed inside lunar orbit, a CME en route, the strongest earthquake of 2026, and the same agency that tracks all of these things telling you, with complete sincerity, that none of it is related. that sincerity is not a cover-up. It is almost certainly genuine. But it is also a reminder that not related and not remarkable are very different classifications, and official science is in the business of the first, not the second. Part 4. The numbers. There is a concept in statistics called a Poisson distribution, a mathematical model for predicting how often rare, random, independent events cluster in time. It is the tool you would use to model, say, how often a particular intersection sees multiple accidents in the same week when the underlying rate is low. Apply a rough Poisson model to fireball events of the magnitude we have been discussing, and the probability of observing 7 in 8 days given historical US baselines falls somewhere between 0.3% and 1.2% depending on how you define the threshold. In other words, unlikely, but not astronomically so. This is the kind of thing that happens, statistically speaking, perhaps a few times per decade. The problem is that this particular cluster is not happening in a baseline year. It is happening in a year that has already seen elevated fireball counts across all categories. January and February 2026 both ranked in the top quartile for reported fireball events for their respective calendar months going back 15 years. The AMS reported 22% more fireball events in the first 10 weeks of 2026 compared to the same period in 2024. March has now blown past that. There are known reasons why fireball counts fluctuate. The Earth passes through predictable meteor, streams, the Perseids, the Leonids, the Geminids, on a reliable annual schedule. But March is not the peak of any major named stream. The Virginids are active in March, producing a modest uptick in activity, but the Virginids are not known for producing meteorite falls or building-shaking bolides. They are a minor stream of debris. This is not the Virginids. There are also sporadic meteors, random, unmapped debris scattered throughout the inner solar system that Earth sweeps up unpredictably. The current thinking among most planetary scientists is that nearly all of the March 2026 events are sporadic in character, meaning they come from different directions, different orbital families, different origin points in the asteroid belt or the outer solar system. The Houston rock probably came from the inner belt. The March 6th bolide may have been a short-period comet fragment. The Michigan events showed distinct entry angles inconsistent with a common source. Sporadic then, unconnected, independent, and somehow all arriving within the same narrow window. Part 5. What the researchers will say off the record. Here is something that does not often make it into press releases. Planetary scientists, when not speaking for attribution, are genuinely puzzled by elevated sporadic rates. The standard model of the sporadic meteor background treats it as roughly stable over human timescales, a steady hum of debris that Earth passes through at a predictable rate. But there is a growing body of research suggesting that the sporadic background is more variable than this model assumes. A 2019 paper in Icarus by researchers at the University of Western Ontario documented statistically significant short-term clustering and sporadic fireball rates that could not be explained by known streams. A 2022 follow-up paper found evidence of what the authors called microcomplexes, loose, dispersed clouds of material sharing only approximate orbital ancestry that can temporarily elevate local encounter rates without constituting a named stream. In plain English, there may be diffuse, unmapped swarms of debris that Earth occasionally passes through, producing episodes exactly like what we are witnessing in March 2026, that our current cataloguing systems are too coarse to identify in advance. We know about the Perseids because we know about Comet Swift-Tuttle and its debris trail. We may be passing through something similar right now, something without a known parent, without a name, without a prediction, and we would have no forewarning until the fireball started. This is the explanation that sits most comfortably within mainstream science. It does not require anything exotic. It does not require the involvement of the CME or the Tonga earthquake or the close-passing asteroid. It requires only that our maps of the inner solar system are incomplete, which they certainly are, and that Earth occasionally, unpredictably walks through a room it didn't know was there. Part 6. The harder questions. But let's stay a little longer with the things that don't fit. The connection between solar activity and fireball rates is one of the genuinely contested edges of planetary science. The standard position is that there is no mechanism by which solar output, including CMEs and elevated UV radiation, could influence the rate at which debris enters Earth's atmosphere. The objects in question are being gravitationally directed from the asteroid belt or the Kuiper belt on trajectories determined millions of years ago. A coronal mass ejection cannot redirect a rock, and yet there is a small but persistent literature suggesting correlations between solar cycle peaks and elevated meteorite recovery rates. A 2014 analysis of the Japanese meteorite catalogue found a statistically significant p less than 0.05 correlation between solar maximum years and the frequency of recovered falls. The proposed mechanism, speculative, contested, and far from accepted, involves the solar wind's effect on the Yarkovsky force, a subtle thermal radiation pressure that slowly alters the trajectories of small bodies over long timescales. At solar maximum, when the solar wind is most intense and variable, the Yarkovsky effect on small near-Earth objects might be slightly but measurably perturbed. We are currently at or very near the peak of solar cycle 25. The CME heading for Earth this week is part of a pattern of elevated solar activity that has characterized the past 8 months. The question of whether this solar maximum is altering the flux of incoming material, even marginally, even indirectly, is not one that can be definitively answered yet. But it is a question that should be asked, studied, and funded. It is not being asked loudly enough. Part 7. The Woman in Katy, Texas. Let's return, before we conclude, to the woman in Katy, Texas, because her story is not just a data point. It is something else, a reminder of the scale at which these events operate, when they become personal. She was not home when it happened. She had gone to get groceries. She came back to a hole in her roof. She called her husband. Her husband called the police, who called the fire department, who called a geologist at Rice University, who arrived and confirmed within 2 hours that the object on her spare bedroom floor was a genuine extraterrestrial visitor, a fragment of material that had been drifting through the solar system undisturbed for approximately 4.5 billion years. Her house is approximately 30 years old. The roof is asphalt shingles over plywood decking. The meteorite punched through both cleanly, left a 7-centimetre entry hole, and came to rest having lost most of its velocity to the insulation and drywall. Had anyone been in that room, the outcome would have been very different. Had she been sitting at the desk in the corner of that room where she sometimes works from home, she would have been directly in its path. The last confirmed meteorite strike on an occupied structure in the United States occurred in 1954, when a 4-kilogram meteorite crashed through the roof of a house in Sylacauga, Alabama, and struck Anne Hodges as she slept on her couch. She survived. In the entire recorded history of human civilization, fewer than 10 people are known to have been directly struck by meteorites, and none fatally. The woman in Katy, Texas, is the latest entry in that list. She is, by all accounts, shaken but fascinated. She has been contacted by 6 universities. The meteorite, per Texas law, is hers. It is currently valued at approximately $14,000. It is also, by the logic of the official explanation, just a coincidence that it fell during the same week as a building-shaking bolide over 4 states and 2 separate meteor events over Michigan. Just the universe, doing what the universe does, indifferent to our calendars and our sense of narrative. Background noise, normal operations. Part 8. Something has changed here, is what we know, not what we suspect, what we know. The rate of significant fireball events over the United States in March 2026 is elevated above historical norms by a statistically meaningful margin. A 7-ton object made atmospheric entry close enough to the surface to shake buildings across 4 states. A meteorite fell through a residential roof in suburban Houston. The same state experienced 2 meteor events on 2 separate nights within 6 days. A green fireball crossed the Pacific Northwest sky yesterday morning. A close-passing asteroid crossed inside lunar orbit today. A CME is inbound. The strongest earthquake of 2026 just struck Tonga. None of these events, in the view of the agencies responsible for monitoring them, are connected to one another. Each is, in isolation, explicable. Each has a perfectly ordinary scientific category into which it fits. But science does not only explain individual events. Science is also in the business of recognizing patterns, of asking when the dice come up 3 times in a row, whether the dice might be loaded, or whether we are sitting near a more interesting part of the table than we realized. Something is different about the sky over America in March 2026. Whether that something is a diffuse unmapped debris field that our catalogues missed. whether it is a subtle effect of the solar maximum on the orbital dynamics of small near-Earth objects, whether it is simply a statistical fluctuation at the far end of the distribution curve, an improbable but not impossible clustering of independent events, or whether it is something we do not yet have the framework to name, all of these remain open questions. What is not an open question is whether the questions deserve to be asked. They do. They are not being asked loudly enough. They are being met with the institutional reassurance that these things happen, that they are coincidence, that the background rate is within expected parameters, that there is nothing unusual. Here, move along. But a 7-ton rock shook 4 states. A meteorite fell through a woman's roof in Houston. An asteroid crossed inside the orbit of the moon today. A plume of solar plasma is hours away from striking Earth's magnetic field. And yesterday morning, a green fireball blazed across the sky from Portland to Seattle, long and slow and inexplicable, and the night sky answered no questions. Something has changed. We don't know what. We don't know why. And the first step toward knowing, the one thing that honest science requires above all else, is refusing to be satisfied with not connected as a complete answer. The sky is telling us something. We should probably listen.